great. I'm Felicia Marcus, chair of the board, and today is Tuesday, March 17th. And at about 9:09, I'm calling this meeting to order. To my left is Vice Chair Fran Spivey-Weber. To her left, Board Member Didi Diadamo. To my right, Board Member Tam Dodek. And to her right, Board Member Stephen Moore. Mr. Howard, will you introduce the staff that's assisting today?
Thank you. To my left, Michael Laufer, Chief Counsel. To my right, John Bishop and Karen Turgovich, Chief Deputies. And assisting the board today are Janine Townsend and Courtney Davis.
Great, thank you. For those of you who don't know the rules in this building, emergency evacuation procedures, if you hear emergency sound, look now for where the nearest exit signs are and pick up your stuff, take your friends, and proceed safely out of the building. We convene near the corner of 10th and J. If you want to hang out with us, you'll know when the all clear comes to come back if you're interested in that. This meeting is being webcast and recorded. That means a couple of things. One is it'd be good to set your phones on stun or silent or turn them off for the duration so as not to disrupt it. It also means that when you come up to the microphone, it's important to speak, make sure the green light's on. Is there a green light on this one? On that one? In any event, they'll know if it's on. But you have to speak fairly close to it, but not, I have been telling people to do the rock star thing and get really close, but apparently I'm told by a radio authority who I respect a lot that creates a burst of static when you speak. So it's probably best to just be a few inches away from it. And that's important because even if we can hear you, we want the people in the back of the room to hear you, and we really want the people on the webcast to be able to hear you. And trust me when I say it's not that easy to remember how to do that. All right. With that done, we're on the public forum, and this is when we hear from any person who wants to talk about something that is not on the agenda. Okay? Ask?
Yeah.
Item, which one?
7.
Okay. Mr. Rubin. John Rubin, San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
That doesn't seem like it's on.
Let me start again. Apologize. John Rubin, General Counsel for the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority, and I did just want to take a minute or two of your time, talk to you about one of your, what appears to be one of your greatest challenges this year and was last year when you're dealing with limited water supply, and that is balancing the needs between people who are tending to the agricultural lands here in California, people in urban communities, and the environment. And last year, and so far this year, within the Bay Delta, significant attention has been given to the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. And I wanted to highlight for you something that I think you're aware of, that those two projects are just two of many factors that have been identified as stressing fish and wildlife. There are significant physical, biological, chemical changes that have occurred to the Bay Delta system that affect fish and wildlife. And many of those have been identified in your water quality control plan. And I draw your attention to the program of implementation specifically. In that program of implementation, you identify fishing, illegal harvest, invasive species, loss of spawning habitat, loss of riparian habitat, loss of marshland habitat, and loss of upland habitat as well as factors that should be addressed in order to achieve the goals of that plan for the Bay Delta. I also provided to you today that you should have an excerpt from a recovery plan that the National Marine Fisheries Service prepared last year in July. To me, it's one piece of the recovery plan. It's an attachment The one that I provided to you today deals with winter run. There are two other attachments that are provided that deal with spring run as well as steelhead. To me, it's a very interesting, intriguing example of the stressors for winter run. The document that I provided to you has somewhere around 90 to 100 stressors, and many of them are unrelated to the operation of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. From my perspective, from the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority's perspective, we're hearing very little about the impacts of stressors other than the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project during this time of drought. And we're hearing very little about what might be done to address these other stressors during this time of drought. And so I stand here today to ask you whether you, as a board, your staff, whether those that have regulatory authority over water users, regulatory authority involving fish and wildlife, are having the discussion about the stressors, particularly other than the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. And I also am here to ask whether there's been any analysis that tries to identify the impacts of fish and wildlife that are due to the drought, that tries to identify the effects of your actions to try to balance both in terms of positives and negatives for people in agricultural communities, urban communities, and fish and wildlife. And also that considers the effects of inaction. What could have been done last year? What might be done this year? With that, I end my remarks. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you for this document, and thank you for your comments. I have similar concerns and would just welcome your suggestions as to, during this emergency period where decisions have to be made quickly and thoughtfully. We're required to balance, but some of these actions some of these stressors that have been identified, if not the majority of them, involve quite a bit of work and aren't things that could be done in short order. Nonetheless, I'd be very curious as to your opinion as to what we could do to help identify what could be done during this period to help us address those stressors and also to help us to do a better job balancing.
Yeah, and I think that the two things that come to my mind is one is as suggested by my question, at least start a dialogue if it hasn't occurred. And if actions can't be taken, I think that's critically important for you to be thinking about as you look at and are asked to make changes or to take action. This line of thinking that I've tried to convey to you today has come out of some information that I've seen about the impacts of the drought last year, and specifically on winter run. And we've seen some statements out of agencies that have indicated that a significant amount of winter run were adversely affected because of temperature conditions. And the question that, the first response is, well, something should be done to avoid that this year. And I think there is a lot of balancing that needs to be done as you ask that question and try to answer that question. And in my mind, one of the questions that has been raised in my mind is, if there wasn't that mortality, how would those fish what would have been the fate of those fish? And particularly when you start hearing about the survival rates of fish from the upper Sacramento, the Feather River to the Delta, and there's significant mortality for those fish. And those are pieces of information that should be before you, and you should be considering whether there's action being taken to avoid that or to try to minimize that mortality as the fish are out migrating. And if things are being done, great. And if things aren't, it's another piece of information that would help you balance, I believe, given all the competing demands.
Well, in the context of the TUCP and petition for reconsideration, I imagine you'd have an opportunity to raise those concerns, but I suppose the broader question is going forward to have a dialogue, the amount of effort that would be involved, and I would just suggest maybe your organization and the state contractors and others that, as you say, outside the project, if this is something that you're interested in, maybe if you could make some suggestions on how to move forward, recognizing the challenge that we have with these issues during the period of the drought, to pull something together in short order.
Right. I would just kind of reject the premise of the question, however, because these conversations are happening and the balance is happening. What your comment suggests is perhaps as we're having our conversations out at the board that we have some reporting on that, perhaps in the context of the TUCP, but Fish and Wildlife agencies and others have been struggling to do fish rescues and evaluate this stuff. The agencies have been working together. I'd be stunned if you're not aware of those conversations because they tend to be general knowledge. These balancing questions are nonetheless very, very difficult. And so I'm going to take that as a suggestion that we just make sure that the fish agencies and others are here so that we can also have the conversation out in public.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, I didn't intend to suggest, and I was trying to be careful in terms of the words I used, not that the discussions are not occurring. But again, our perspective is that the vast majority of the focus is on the Central Valley Project, State Water Project.
Yeah, and I don't believe that's true either. So let's, duly noted, if you don't know that, that gives a suggestion to what needs to be more public conversation.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay. Next I have Dan Cosgrove, but Mr. Cosgrove, did you want to come in public comment as opposed to, well, I guess it either makes sense in the context of the conservation regs or public comment. It's up to you. Yeah, no, it's fine. That's good.
In the last meeting, or prior to the last meeting in newspaper, I'm sorry? Dan Cosgrove. I'm the owner of Welcome Building Maintenance. We're a power washing company. Prior to the last meeting, the newspaper stated that it was your intention to possibly shut down all hard water power washing. We presented our case, and at the time, folks gave us sort of an extension to see what we can do. So presently, what we're doing is we're working with a system out of the Contra Costa Water District, allowing us to use recycled water. Great. Recently, we completed a job prior to painting. It was 75 units. We pressure washed it, and we used 10,000 gallons of recycled water without using 1 ounce of regular water. So what we're doing now with all of our clients that come in, we're offering them the option of this or using their water. So I just want to report that to you.
Really appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And you're staying in touch with our staff, presumably.
I'm sorry?
You're staying in touch with our staff as well, so they know what you're working on?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. No more public comment. Now we'll move to board business. Minutes from the March 3rd board meeting. Is there a motion?
Move adoption of the minutes from the March 3rd board meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I just want to make you wait. The minutes, sorry, the minutes are approved. We have items 2 through 4 listed as uncontested. Do we have any cards for those? All right.
Move adoption of all of items 2 through 4.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and I want to thank the Department of Water Resources for their assistance with respect to item number 4.
And since we're thanking, I want to thank staff who worked on the responses to comments for item 3. Did an excellent job on that.
Great, thank you very much. Item number 5 is our update on the drought with the broader team.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Amanda Montgomery, the program manager. Oh. Can you hear me now? Okay, I'll get closer. So I'm the manager for water rights permitting and licensing, and I'm going to give just a very short update on drought. Within my section, we received our first water transfer of the 2015 season. It came in last Thursday. And it's from Forest Hill Public Utility District for their Sugar Pine Reservoir. They have stored water there that they plan to transfer to Santa Clara Valley Water District. It's 2,000 acre-feet of water. And the water would be moved to Folsom Lake by June 1st, and then held there for a period of time, and then moved through the Sacramento River through the Delta to Santa Clara during the period of July through September. So we will be noticing this petition shortly, at the end of this week or early next week. Then, just as a reminder, we have that shortened noticing period for transfers of 15 days under the governor's drought declaration from April. So we'll have a 15-day noticing period, and then we'll, depending on what happens with that, it will be likely issued shortly thereafter. So just to give you an update on that.
For the folks on the web, what's the typical noticing period for water transfer?
30 days.
Right.
So it's down to half the amount of time under that governor's drought declaration of April.
Right.
So additionally, I'm not going to provide an update on the information order side of enforcement, since there is a separate item for you later on. And I believe is there a presentation that follows this, Les? I'll let Les come up and introduce the presentation that will be happening from the projects. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Les Grover. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for Water Rights, and I'm joined here today by Mr. John Lehi from the Department of Water Resources and Ron Milligan from the Bureau of Reclamation. They're going to provide a brief update on drought operations under the TUCP. I really will just mention that on March 5th, the Executive Director issued another TUCP, and we expect that we'll be receiving another TUCP by the end of this month, probably next Monday, to carry us through the rest of the year. So we'll be asking for whatever else might be required from April through the end of the year. So with that, I'll turn it over to John and Ron, but if you have questions for us or for them regarding drought operations and deliverables under the TUCP, please let us know.
Okay, good morning. Chair Marcus, Board. I do have a slide presentation that's being loaded right now. Someone just before I came up suggested that all I'm really going to say is it's dry, and the drought continues. But I have about 16 slides to tell you it's dry, and but I think some of the nuances are important, and will kind of inform the board on how the hydrologic exceedances have changed over time and how that relates to our TUCP process. So, underway, our first slide here, just looking at the precipitation, which incidentally, the Northern Sierra 8-station precip is probably the most misleading indicator of just how dry it is this year. But I will start with the precip because that's where it all starts. And you can see how this year has played out. And just as a review, we all know about the very hopeful start to this year in December. And really, as you see some of the later slides, what you'll see what that early precip really did was help recover some of that depleted storage that we had seen, the very low storages that we had coming into this year. At least it got us back to about where we were last year at the beginning of the year. And so, you know, and you'll see that in some of the subsequent slides. Of course, after that hopeful start, January was the lowest January on record for the 8-station Northern Sierra. So that dashed that initial hopefulness. We did see what is common for our hydrology, which is a very brief period of precip. We received well over 90% of our precip in just 3 days, and that was in the early February period. So that's the flashiness of the hydrology that we deal with in this state. And then we return now to well over a month of a pattern that looks very much like January. So, so far to date, March, we are tracking the driest March on record. So we'll see how that plays out. As far as the San Joaquin is concerned, you can take the bad news for the Sacramento, for the Northern Sierra, and just take away the December precip, and then you've got a good picture of what the San Joaquin Basin looks like. So not only has it been dismally dry January through with that brief storm in February and then now March, but we really didn't get the early December precip to kind of reset some of the storages in that system. So that system's in an even tougher position. So here is the current storage picture around the state and the major reservoirs, and you can see that even though there was, as I said, some recovery of the storage in the northern part of the state, those are still well below averages for both, well, in terms of capacity, just a little over half full for a period of time where we would typically be, filling these reservoirs. And you can see Shasta, 76% of average for this state. Oroville, just below 70%. So just to drill down a bit on the individual reservoirs, so this is this year's storage versus last year's storage. So you can see what I had talked about earlier, that those early December storms did bring the storages up. Shasta actually did better than most in the north part of the state. You can see it is looks like it's topping out, but it's a few 100,000 acre feet higher than it was at its peak last year. Although you could see also that we might start seeing the drafting of that reservoir much sooner than last year. So we'll see how that plays out. Trinity, so if you take a look at both Shasta and Trinity as a pair, you can see that Trinity never did quite make it back to where it was last year. So as a combination, Shasta and Trinity is not doing much better than last year as far as storage. Oroville, again, there was much recovery there in December. A good trend, another bump up in February, but now we're kind of fading, and we will be lucky to actually reach the same storage level that we did at our peak last year. Folsom doing a little bit better relatively, near average to date as far as the storage, and you can see pretty close to where it topped out last year. However, subsequent slides, when I get into the snowpack or lack of snowpack in that basin, what does that mean for the remainder of the year? New Melones, so here's the example of what's going on in the San Joaquin Basin. We never saw that December recovery. So, we started the year a little less than half of that below average storage that occurred the beginning of last year. And so there has been, no recovery there whatsoever, and we're just starting to get into the period of drawdown. So the snowpack, this is really the big story. So any of that precip that we saw was in liquid form, and it's in storage now. There's practically nothing in our snowpack whatsoever. You might not be able to make it out real well on these charts, but up and down the Sierra, we are not only lower than last year, lower than 77 as far as snowpack is concerned. I think we're really looking at record-breaking lows for snowpack come April 1st, unless there's a significant turnaround that's not currently in the forecast between now and April 1st. So how does this translate to runoff? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take a run through how the forecasted runoff based on the snowpack and anticipated precip for the remainder of the year, how this picture has changed since January when we first put together our drought contingency plan. So what we're showing here is, in the darker blue, is the historical Sacramento Valley runoff, as you can see, from 1906 through last year. And so I've also depicted on that top line kind of where the historical 90%, 50%, and 10% exceedances fall along that historical record. And what I also have shown there in green is what the forecasts were based on January 1st conditions for runoff for the water year for the Sacramento Basin. And so when we came to you back in January, the January 50% was because of the positive December precipitation, in some sense kind of reset the system after the dry antecedent conditions coming off of 2014. And so it was pretty close to historical 50%. And then you can see the 90 and the 99. After the driest January on record for the Sacramento Valley, you can then see what happened with the updated forecast based on the actual February 1st snow surveys. So you see that huge reduction at the 50% level, getting closer to what had been the 90% for January 1st. And you also see that the February 90% and 99s actually slid all the way past drier than the January 99 that we had come to you with on that contingency plan.
What a difference a month makes.
Yes, absolutely. That's what happens when what's typically the wettest month of the year is an all-time record dry. So huge change as related to the forecast. Now here's the update based on the March numbers, the March 1st snow surveys. So we continued to see decline on the 50% exceedance. So it has now, that new 50% exceedance is drier than the 90% exceedance from January. There was actually some improvement on the 90 and the 99. If I'll just back up here for a second, you can see where they were in February. Because there was that storm, pretty good storm in early February, it did actually help the drier exceedances. But the new 90 was right where the 99 was in January, and the March 99 was significantly drier. Now this is for the water year. So these forecasts include all of the runoff that has occurred to date, plus what we expect to see. And so it includes all of the good runoff that we saw in December and is now gone, except for what we retained in storage. So probably a better indicator as far as the forecast is concerned is what do we expect to see from this point forward, and that's captured better in the April through July forecast, which only includes what's ahead of us, not the runoff that we've already received. And here's what that picture looks like. The median April through July is, at this point, is drier than the 90%. The 90 and 99% would be record lows for April through July for the Sacramento Valley. And of important note here is we've now gone through half. This is for conditions as of March 1st. We've seen a dry first half of March, so undoubtedly that March 50% for April through July has moved significantly to the left. Incidentally, I'm not sure if you can pick it up, there is one of the diamonds there is black. That is last year's actual April through July. So we're going to be looking at back-to-back years that could be as a pair, they could be drier than the 76, 77 sequence as it relates to the April through July runoff.
And John, I think it's useful to point out your earlier statement, which was just how dismal the snowpack is and how this feeds into these estimates for runoff. And could you also remind folks about, typically what % of our storage statewide is in the snowpack, which is now not available to us in 2015?
Yes, that's correct. So, the vast majority of the water supply is in the snowpack. That is the primary storage reservoir for the state. And the fact that we are in now in single digits in percentages for the year does not bode well, and that's reflected directly in these numbers for April through July, because it's all about what kind of snowpack exists at that point. So if this forecast for the weather forecast plays out for the end of this month, we would expect what you see here as the optimistic numbers. So everything would slide to the left. The San Joaquin, so this is a comparison on the water, going back to the water year again, just a comparison from January's forecast. And again, as I had mentioned, December rains did not really hit the southern Sierra. So right out of the gate, the median forecast was significantly drier than the historical median for the San Joaquin Basin back in January in green. The 90 and 99 were much drier than the historical 90 at that point, and that was because we never really had a reset of the system for the southern Sierra. And so the antecedent conditions carrying over from the dry 2014 were affecting the runoff forecasts for that system. So you also see now the updated March, and you can see where the March median forecast has now slipped drier than the historical 90, and the 90 and 99% are near record territory there for the San Joaquin Valley water year. And so just one last slide on hydrology. Again, here's the April through July forecast for the San Joaquin Valley, and similar type picture as on the Sacramento side, where looks like the median forecast would predict we would have a repeat of last year's April through July on the San Joaquin Basin, and the 90 and 99 would be new record lows for April through July. And again, this is based on March 1st, and we've seen a dry first half of the month. So again, everything moving to the left there. So just to circle back a bit.
Can I interrupt you for a
Sure.
second? Mr. Lehi, two things. Number one is we have an elected official. We're about to have another one who are here for an item after you. So when they're both here, if you don't mind, we'll take a little moment and allow them to speak so they can get back over to the legislature. I just didn't want to surprise you by interrupting you mid-sentence or something like that. So shortly. And then the second is, the numbers that you're showing are really sobering is a mild word, frightening may not be the right word. Can you help the folks, because I've had a lot of people ask me this question and I've endeavored to answer it, which is they look at the reservoir levels and they say, well, it's a little better in a couple places, isn't it? And I'll say, well, yes, it's a little better in a couple of places, including a little bit better in San Luis, but it's terrible in the San Joaquin. But the fact that snowpack is so abysmal means that it's probably worse, which is, I think, what your charts are getting at. What does that mean for this year? I mean, because frequently people focus on contract allocations from the state and federal projects, but that's just one piece, as Mr. Rubin said, of the puzzle. I mean, how do you, is there a more prosaic way to be able to make the case or paint the picture of what that lack of snowpack means combined with the reservoir storage, since all of it would have melted either down a surface water course or into a reservoir? I just don't know as much about the refill rate expectations.
Well, I think to try to summarize it, what it means is as dismal as the water supply was last year, we're at this point, it's becoming increasingly more likely that we're looking at an even drier situation in 2015 because of the lack of this snowpack is actually less than where we were last year. So there were not good things that happened last year as a result of those dry conditions. So unfortunately, that means more bad news this coming year. And in some ways could very well mean, more actions that not positive. So
right, and then as you look at this, the questions come pretty quickly from us, in terms of are you looking at drought barriers, constructing barriers in the delta to control salinity? Obviously, your preceding graphs are pointing us toward the bottom of this slide that we're looking at right now, which is the 99% hydrology planning. And maybe we could help focus the discussion by trying to prepare folks for what's coming in the next few months.
Thank you. Yes. So again, this was what we presented back in January as part of our drought contingency plan. And so at the time, statistically, it was unlikely that we would be looking at the most dire scenario, which is that lowest block there, which indicates that 99% hydrology. And that was the 99% hydrology as we sat there January 1st, before the driest January on record, before what could be one of the driest Marches on record where we are now. So those odds shifted significantly. The most likely scenario we are now looking at is that bottom table. So as you can see, a lot more yellow in that table as it relates to potential requests for modified standards due to the fact we just don't have the supply to meet them. So this first step on the TUCP that we anticipate delivering to the executive director next week includes most of the standard modifications outlined in that bottom table. Right now, with the exception of those standards associated with installation of emergency drought barriers, we are, the analysis, the biological review associated with that type of action is a bit more complicated than just the other standards. Quite frankly, the set of standards that were part of our TUCP that we're presenting next week looks very similar to the set that we put forth last year at about this time and that was approved. Some of the exceptions would include the San Joaquin Basin. There are additional requests as far as that system is concerned, and as I laid out in the numbers, a big reason for that is it's much more dire picture for San Joaquin than it was last year. The other exception is probably the mid-step. We're going to continue to keep it in the request for the coming April through September period. However, it's probably quite unlikely that it would come into play just because conditions would be so dry. But we would like to keep that tool on the table. And so that will likely be part of our request.
As approved or as originally proposed?
I think as originally proposed, maybe with some additional language as far as the conditional use of that as approved perhaps through the RT dot process. So it wouldn't be a blanket approval, it would be on a case-by-case approval through that body, through that RT dot. So that would probably be the one change we're considering as far as when we bring that forward.
A quick question, and then I'm going to take a quick break to hear from
Sure.
our elected officials. Last year, one of the things that the agencies did was pull together groups of stakeholders to talk through ways of managing through the challenge. There were meetings with the environmental community. There were meetings with contractors of all kinds. Are you planning on scheduling those meetings, or have you been having those meetings so that folks have an opportunity to actually chat with you before proposals come forward?
We have had ongoing meetings with certainly water users on at least twice a week. And I imagine that effort will ramp up, including other stakeholders as we move, if we continue to move down this direction on potential additional asks here for the board.
My suggestion would be that you have those conversations before you ask so that people understand what you're asking for and so they can offer different suggestions, apropos what Mr. Rubin said or anybody else would. I just think even though last year was the first year we were trying to do it, so there was a lot of outreach, there's a piece that feels missing, and it's not giving people the opportunity to come up with a better way. I mean, I just suggest that you all convene those meetings so you can call on everybody's better angels.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the idea of what I was hearing in those comments was that there might be a package, you know, of actions that may be a little outside of our typical, or what we did last year, that are achievable in the short term, you know, to distinguish them from long-term, you know, management solutions. So just, you know, keeping minds open as far as what the overall package of items could be. Thanks.
All right, if you don't mind, we're going to take a quick break, and I see Senator Fuller here. Please, thank you for coming over to join us. This is for item number 6, the High Desert Water District discussion.
Good morning, Chair Felicia Marcus and board members. I'm here today just to speak to you about the High Desert Water District's need to implement a new wastewater collection treatment. And I suppose I should start with, I'm Senator Jean Fuller, and this is item 6. And to their reclamation system for the community of Yucca Valley. And I guess of all by a huge, huge area, which is largely Kern County, Tulare County, and all the interior of San Bernardino County, I don't have time to come for every single water district, but I come on this one's behalf because I visited and I've seen their struggle and the amount of money that they're having to put up to increase their water fees per unit is huge. And I know you probably have that information in front of you, so I won't go into it now. But after having looked over what the community is trying to pay and what the community can afford and what the community's needs are, I've decided to ask if you could find a way to help them be creative enough to be able to achieve this system and their plans now, because I'm not sure that there's any other way. So Yucca Valley has, I'll just go through it quickly, no centralized wastewater facilities, and it relies on septic systems for its wastewater. These septic systems are now linked to nitrate contamination in the groundwater basin, resulting in a septic discharge prohibition in May of 2016. The uniqueness and immediacy of the situation in Yucca Valley is why I'm here. The High Desert Water District is relatively small, with limited resources, and the Yucca Valley is considered a disadvantaged community with limited borrowing capabilities. I believe the State Water Resources Control Board is in a position to help this community comply with the time constraints placed on it by the looming discharge prohibition. I strongly encourage the board to offer a 0% interest rate for the first 20 years, not to exceed a 1% interest rate for the next 10 years, to mitigate for the loss of future grants available through Proposition 1 bond funds. I know you've worked really hard with many communities, and there are many communities that are in a very desperate situation these days. And I know that you've done a great job of shepherding your money and the grants and helping people get through. But I know that this is only going to be a bigger problem and a harder mountain to climb if we aren't able to come up with something now that will help them. So thank you for your time and allowing me to come now so I can run back over to the legislature and finish there. And thank you for your work. This is a very, very hard board, and you put a lot of time in, and you've always listened, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to come over and see us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
and thank you for the ongoing conversations that we've had to try to figure out how we can help. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Next, Assembly Member Chad Mays.
Thank you, Chair Marcus, and members of the board, and thank you for also putting us before the item. I know you've got other business at hand.
I'm honored when you all come over here to
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I'm Chad Mays. I represent the 42nd Assembly District. It is a district that has both counties, Riverside County and San Bernardino County. I represent the cities of Yucaipa in San Bernardino County, Yucca Valley, and 29 Palms. In Riverside County, Calamasa, Banning, Beaumont, Hemet, San Jacinto. Also the Coachella Valley cities of Palm Springs, Rancho Mirage, Indian Wells, Palm Desert, and La Quinta. And I'm here today to speak on behalf of the High Desert Water District and also the town of Yucca Valley. And this is actually special for me because I live in the town of Yucca Valley. In fact, I grew up in Yucca Valley. And the message today is that Yucca Valley is a community that has always pulled itself up by its bootstraps. In fact, in the 90s, when I was still in high school, there was a few things that, yeah, well, I know. A few things occurred in the community. We had the first Gulf deployment. 29 Palms is the 29 Palms Marine Corps base, and really it is the economic engine for the Morongo Basin, the community in which Yucca Valley and the High Desert Water District serve. We had the first Gulf deployment. There was a water moratorium and a very expensive water pipeline that the community had to fund to come in to be able to have water. There was no more building that occurred. And we also had the 1992 Landers earthquake. The 90s were not good years for the Morongo Basin, not good years for Yucca Valley. In fact, in large part, the reason I got involved in public service was because I saw the devastation that occurred in my community, and I wanted to help. So after college, I moved back to the community at the age of 25. I ran for the Yucca Valley Town Council. I served for 8 years on the town council before going off to work, be a chief of staff to a supervisor in San Bernardino County. I want to make that point because I know this community well, and we talk about it being a disadvantaged community. The town of Yucca Valley's budget is around $10 million. Is that still correct? Around $10 million. The High Desert Water District's budget is about $7 or $8 million. This project is $140 million. That's a lot of money. So even if you took the water district's budget, you took the town's budget, funded nothing else, you could not fund this project. So this community is not asking for a handout. This community is asking for a hand up. And what we're asking for today is that you would hear, they're going to go into the technical stuff here in a little bit, but if you could listen to them, and we need some help. The point here is that without the right financing plan, before this goes before the voters just might reject the proposal. And I am pleased to hear that the board and its staff, working with the governor's office, are making progress. But whatever you can do to be able to assist this community, this is a big deal. Again, this community is not asking for a handout. We want to be able to fund this on our own, but if you could just give us a little bit of help, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. All right, and we'll return to that item after this item concludes. Thank you, Mr. Wright. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, I kind of dominated the discussion up to now, so I'd like to turn it over to our partner agency with Ron Milligan, see if he has a few words he'd like to add.
Oh my God.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and board. John has run through all the slides. I had no additional ones. I guess just to hit on a couple of high points here. Particularly the San Joaquin River Basin. Last time we talked, that was a point of concern for us, and I think that we will, we have been working with fishery agencies and local districts in particularly the Stanislaus Basin and on the San Joaquin River. So we will probably have some specifics within our next change petition request as it relates to a package of flows and timing of flows for the San Joaquin River Basin for your consideration. They're shifted up in time from what typically we would see for flows on the San Joaquin, primarily because temperatures down there are increasing. On top of the dryness, we've also seen fairly warm temperatures here the last couple months, and that's just kind of setting the fish up to actually be time to get them out of the system a little bit sooner. So that will also be part of the package. And then unfortunately, after we tried to cue the fish out, it appears that temperatures will really be escalating, and that we'll see flows dropping probably closer to what we saw last summer earlier. I think a theme of all of John's slides as they relate back to the snowpack, and we have a much drier spring this year than we had last year, so everything seems to be accelerated when you plot these up. Folsom, we get a lot of questions about Folsom. Gee, you're right around average storage, but when you plot this, it just looks to me like you're 6 weeks to 2 months earlier in just how you would see the lake kind of fill, and we're just about ready to turn that corner. Instead of making the last run to fill the lake, we're probably right on the cusp of actually starting to lose storage there. And it's not a linear relationship with the snowpack. So, when you get into these single digits in terms of water content for this date, in the, let's say, 8-9%, doesn't mean you're going to get 8-9% runoff. You're probably going to get closer to zero. And that's a struggle for, I think, the forecasters as well as us in terms of figuring out where we are exactly in terms of where we might end up with storage. So that's complicating, I think, water supply, temperature management, and to be quite honest, the compounding part is in the Sac Valley, where the creeks are starting to also run drier earlier than last year. That's going to make it more difficult as we get into spring operations, and we make reservoir releases, but again, we probably won't see a lot of that water getting to the Delta because we're not helping getting support from local streams as well. So this is going to be an interesting month forecast-wise and planning, I think, from requests to the board as well as temperature planning and just trying to think about supplies and timing. And I think the April 1st forecast will also be very interesting in figuring out just where we set up for the late spring and summer.
I know that one of the things that you've been working on, in part because of Mr. Howard's order, but presumably you would have been doing anyway, is a hindcast review of how temperature worked on the SAC side last year. Do you have any preliminary observations of what you've learned and what you might do differently this year?
Yeah, there's a couple things with that. That's an interesting exercise because there are some dynamics that occurred last year that weren't necessarily anticipated to the extent that they did occur. We did submit a package of the hindcasting to the board last evening, and I apologize for that was modified to be due last Friday, but we had some formatting questions and some of the modeling input. However, I see this as just a first step in a process that over the next 6 weeks we're probably going to be looking at in earnest. The main focus of this first step for the hindcasting was to look at the temperature model that we use within the Shasta Trinity system, Whiskeytown, to see just why didn't we see some of the predictions of the conditions that did occur. And we did take some great effort to try to parse out the components of the model and the temperature planning to try to diagnose this and figure out where that deviation primarily was. Because you're modeling 3 reservoirs and imports of water from the Trinity system, there are different components that you need to be able to simulate to have some success of forecasting. Part of it is the stratification of the lake. Part of it's the performance of the temperature control device. And that also includes the temperature of the water you can bring over from the Trinity system, as well as being able to predict the warming of water from just downstream of Shasta Dam down to a temperature compliance point. And the question was, okay, where does that, in that process, was it a failure of all those pieces or just specific ones? And we took an effort to try to parse that out. And where we've at this point diagnosed the biggest concern was with the temperature control device operation, and primarily in the context of, and we don't have a graphic of this, but I stand to be willing to do a complete presentation just on Shasta temperatures, is the side gates of the temperature control device in Shasta is a component that is designed to get the last element of cold water out of the lake. We seem to have had good correlation to how the lake stratified last summer, pretty good correlation to the operation of the control device through the late spring and early part of the summer, and actually conditions leading up right to the point where we were going to operate the side gates of the device. And at that point, the stratification of the lake was such that we were not able to draw the cold water from the point in the reservoir that the model had indicated would be possible. And we have utilized the side gate operation many years in operations of the temperature control device, but this was a little bit earlier in the season than typical, and also the lake levels were lower, and the stratification of the lake was far more extreme than we'd seen in the past. And that's an element of components that we are trying to see how we weave that into our planning into this next year, because unfortunately we're seeing some potential conditions that might leave us in a similar situation. So preliminarily, one of the lessons learned would be to try to delay side gate operations as long as we can, so that when you superimpose that on the actual spawning and rearing of winter wren Chinook, that you're delaying, if that thing does not operate as well as it could, that's not as further in past the life stage where that won't have the same effect on mortality. We continue to refine this. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like, without barring some increased